Father, we just thank you for just the opportunity to come together, all part of your body, to dwell in your presence, Lord, and just soak up your spirit. Oh Lord, I pray as I bring the word today, Lord, that it will be a word that you want, Lord. Lord, give me clarity of thought as I share it. Lord, help us to open up our heart and our mind to receive what you want us to receive. Lord, we pray for the Holy Spirit just to give us revelation on your word. Lord, that we, as we open ourselves up to the Holy Spirit, Lord, you speak to us, speak to our heart, that we grow in our relationship with you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. A few weeks ago, during worship, we were singing that song, No Longer a Slave to Fear, I Am a Child of God. And God said to me, too many people are still slaves to fear, even if they are told God. So I thought about it, and I asked God, I'm assuming, God, you want me to share on that, speak on that subject? And he gave me a yes. So that's what we're going to share on today, our fear. And we're all called to be a people of faith. We all want to be a people of faith. But one of the main things that can stop us from fulfilling our potential in our faith is fear. Everyone has fear in their life. Everyone's got a fear of something. And some of those fears we can understand, some of those fears make sense. Some of these fears that we have are logical. And you're saying, how can that person be? How can you have fear of that? That's crazy. But to that person, that fear is real. Some people, their lives are controlled by fear. You even have some people's lives are paralysed by fear, so they're unable to function normally in life. Now, if I was to ask around here what people had a fear of, we'd probably get some of the common answers. So fear of heights, fear of snakes, fear of spiders. Well, there's people that have more fears that aren't so common. And some fears that people have, they're even embarrassed to admit that they've got that fear, because it seems so illogical. And even sometimes they know it's illogical, but they can't get over that fear. The fear is powerful. Let's never underestimate the power of fear. Fear will often try and make us think the worst. We get that little headache. Oh, I've got a headache. A little voice in your head says, oh, cancer. And we start panicking. Now we get a little twinge. And twinge. And straight away the thought comes in our head. It's something serious. I remember a few years ago, we had one of the bosses at work had put up with a sore back for years. And he'd come into work and he'd complain about the sore back. And eventually he said, why don't you go to the doctor? You get looked at. And he went off and it was pancreatic cancer. They put the fear in every guy at work who had a sore back. So suddenly there was a stampede to the doctors to get their backs checked out because they had that fear of a cancer. That was the power of fear. The Bible shows us examples of people with fears in their life. And some of that fear often stopped them from fulfilling what God had for them. And sometimes we saw in the Bible, God helped them overcome that fear. And I want to look at just briefly at a couple of examples and then talk a bit more about fear. Now, one of the most common fears was what Moses had. Moses, we think of Moses as one of the greatest leaders the world has ever seen. Now, this guy led over 3 million people. I've heard figures that it was even more, maybe 6 million. You think of trying to lead 6 million people on a trip. But when Moses was called by God to be a leader and to lead the people, he had one of the most common fears upon him. Fear of talking to people. And he came up with all these various excuses why he couldn't be a leader. I don't know what to say. What if they don't believe me? A common fear that people have. Fear of talking to people. And we have that in our lives. God says to you, hey, don't talk to that person over there. Hear the gospel. And we used to have a post up there, walk across the room. That was talking about that. Walking across the room and making friends with a stranger. But one of the most common fears people have is speaking to people, speaking to strangers. I don't know what to say. Share the gospel with somebody. I don't know what to say. It might not go well. And we have that fear, we allow that fear to stop us from going out and sharing the gospel with somebody. And then we kick ourselves later and say, I missed a perfect opportunity there. And Moses had that. God said, I want you to be a leader. I want you to lead people. I want you to go talk to Pharaoh. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. What happens if they don't believe me? The Israelites were at war with the Philistines. They were on one side of the valley. This mighty army of Israelite warriors and had some great battles with God. And had victory. So here they are on one side of the valley, and the other side of the valley are the Philistines. And they're at war. But they were consumed with fear at the sight of Goliath. That's all they could see. You know, across the valley, all they could see was Goliath, and they were consumed with it. So that fear had overcome them. And even Saul, this great warrior, was consumed with fear. And that's what fear can do. It can consume all our focus. And that's all we can see. Is there a giant in your life that you're fearful of and fully focused on? So the Israelites are cowering in fear. That's the side of Goliath. And then arrives David. Now, he's not even allowed to go in battle. He's not considered a warrior. All he's good for is to look after the sheep and run messages for his dad. So he arrives on the scene, but he doesn't see a giant. He only sees an enemy of God that needs to be defeated. So he had completely different focus. Life was still there. Life hadn't disappeared out of picture. But while all the Israelites were focused on Goliath, David was focused on God. Peter, my favourite guy in the Bible. I'll probably say that every time I get up here. Now, I love Peter because I can identify with Peter. Peter disappointed Jesus so many times. And Jesus forgave him, but each time he dusted himself up and said, okay, I'm going to have another go. Now, Peter was the guy that never gave up. Always stuffed up, but got up and had another go. And Peter knew Jesus. He walked with Jesus. He spent time with Jesus. He was close to Jesus. And he witnessed many miracles that Jesus had done. So the disciples are out on the boat by himself. And along comes Jesus walking on water. And all the disciples are fearful of, what is that? Is that a ghost? And Peter recognises who it is. And he's excited and thinks, wow, he's walking on water. I want to have a go at that too. So he calls out to Jesus. Now I want to do that too. And Jesus says, yeah, okay, come on. So he gets out of the boat and walks on water. He's operating faith. And he's focused on Jesus. He walks on water. Matthew 14, verse 28 says, And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. So he said, Come. And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on water and goes to Jesus. But then the next verse says, But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, Lord, save me. So he stepped out of the boat in faith, focused on Jesus, and he walked on water. But then he allowed fear to come into his life, and he looked down at the waves, and they were a bit choppy and wavy, and he took his focus off Jesus and focused on the fear. So his faith disappeared and was replaced by fear. The fear wants us to focus on it. Fear will always try and grab our attention. And we have the Israelites. Moses led them out of Egypt towards the promised land. They've been promised by God, a land of milk and honey. They arrive on the border of the promised land. Now I don't know why they just didn't go straight in and do what they were told by God. But they stopped there and they decided that they'll send some spies in to spy out the land. The 12 of them go in, spy out the land. 2 come back and say exactly what God said it was. A land of milk and honey. Let's go. Go and take the land like God has told us to. But the other 10 came back and said, there we saw giants, the descendants of Anak, the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. Numbers 13, verse 33. The 2 went in and focused on what God had given them. That's what their focus was, the promises of God. 10 came in and focused on fear, and all they saw was giants. And they said that we were like grasshoppers in our own mind. They weren't grasshoppers, but they feared come so much to them. The problem with fear is often when we confront fear, our problems are magnified and our power shrinks in our mind. They allow their fear to sink the word. Their fear magnified the problem, and in turn, their fear infected everybody else in the group as well. And the result was they didn't get to go on the promised land. That generation passed away. See, often we make the mistake of we dwell on fear and we focus on it and we think about it and we ponder on it and it grows. You've got something that's going to occur sometime in the future and you start thinking about it and then you start thinking about all the bad things that could happen. And it magnifies and it grows. And that's what these guys allowed their fear to be magnified, that they get shrunk in their own size. But one of the things when confronted by fear is often we ask and we expect God to totally remove it from our lives. We expect God to give us a fear-free life. And we get that concept in our mind. If I become a Christian, I have a perfect life. I'll never have any problems anymore because I've got God on my side. Everything I pray for, I'll get. So often when we're confronted by fear, we say, God, can you remove that? Get rid of it? But see, sometimes God will do that. He will remove that fear from our lives. But often, he helps us overcome it, not remove it. Because by overcoming our fear, our faith grows. God doesn't remove the storms from our lives. He guides us through those storms. He's with us. We deal with our fears, and we aren't alone. So fear is a bit like pain. We need some of it in our life. Now we all want a pain-free life. We don't want to have any pain in our life. And it'd be great if we didn't ever have any pain in our life. But we need a certain amount of pain in our life. Because how would we know if something was wrong? If I never had any pain, I put my hand on a hot plate, it's pain that tells me that's wrong, move your hand. If I didn't have any pain, I'd never know. So we need a bit of pain in our lives. And it's the same with fear. We need a bit of fear in our lives so we're not careless. Have you ever watched, and all mums can identify with this, a young child who's got no fear in their life at all? Got no fear. It's a real worry as a parent watching them because you can't take your eyes off them. Because they're liable to get into dangerous situations because they've got no sense of fear or danger. Sarah has no concept about road. If she would be let loose, she would just go out on the road. But no concept of fear of getting hit by a car. We need a bit of fear in our life so we're not careless. The key is not to allow the fear to be our master, to control it and enslave it. I grew up with a fear of heights. I don't know why. I never really asked Mum. I should ask Mum one day why I had a fear of heights. But I did. And I remember one of my childhood memories, and I'll show my age now, but it'd be interesting to see how many old Morwellites remember this. Well, I remember going to see Santa here in Morwell. Now, where Harvey Norman is now, that used to be Michael Gus's. All the old Morwellites say, oh, yeah, I remember that. And in Michael Gus's, you walk in, there was another floor, about the middle of the floor, a mezzanine floor where you had to go up some stairs. That's where Santa used to be. Yeah. And you didn't have to pay to see him either back then. He was a freebie. But my fear of height, as a little kid, I couldn't go up and see Santa. So my sisters and my brother were able to go up and see him. I couldn't go up. So I was robbed of seeing Santa when I was little. And as a young Christian, I started my apprenticeship at the SEC, State Electricity Commission, as an apprentice electrician. Part of the thing in the SEC was every 6 months you got moved around to different locations. And as a young Christian, I prayed to God. God, you know I've got a fear of heights. Do not, under any circumstances, send me to one of the power stations. We all know that God answers prayers. True? So guess what? God sent me to a power station. So God will answer our prayers, sometimes not the way that we want. Sometimes we expect a yes and he says no. Sometimes when we want a no, he says yes. So I prayed to God as a young Christian, don't send me to a power station. I'll get sent to W station. W station's 18 floors high. A lot of the floors are mezzanine grid match floors, which means you stand on the floor, you're looking for a grid, so you can see straight down. You stand on the 18th floor of W station, You can see straight down to about the 8th floor. See, God had a reason to send me to the power station because He wanted me to not run from my fear, but confront it and conquer my fear. So my fear had enslaved me and stopped me from enjoying certain things. Now I've learned to kind of adapt, to not get in the areas, but it was stopping me from having a full life. As I said, I missed out on seeing Santa as a little kid. So I ended up at W Station, and I ended up with one of the first tradesmen I worked with, was a guy by the name of Brian Campbell. And being an apprentice, back then, as an apprentice, you did what the tradesman told you. The tradesman told you to go here, to there. So there was no way I could conceal my fear from him. I had to share with him my fear. And so God looked after it. He was going to help me conquer my fear, and He put me with the right guy. I shared my my fear with Brian Campbell. And he didn't mock me. He didn't ridicule me. He said, okay, we're going to have to deal with this. Because you can't work in a power station as a sparky when you're going to be all over the power station. You've got a fear of heights. So we're going to have to deal with it and we're going to have to beat it. And we did. He worked with me over a period of time of helping me conquer my fear. We went up from the lift to the 18th floor. The lift door was open. He said, straight out, don't look down or anything like that. And we did that for ages. And then slowly he got me to come out of the lift and stand just outside the lift to a rubber mat there. And over time, I was able to conquer my fear of height. So if God had answered my prayer the way I wanted, I'd still have a fear of heights because I wouldn't have been sent to WC. But He placed me with the right guy and helped me conquer my fear. Doesn't mean I'm still 100% comfortable with heights. Occasionally when I'm up on the 18th floor and I'm walking out from the big mat and you kind of out in the middle of it and you kind of look down and you think, oh, But I've been able to climb the stacks at W Station to the top as a sparky. I've had to do that to look at the aircraft lights on top. But I was able to conquer my fear because Brian taught me not to focus on it, not focus on the height, but focus on something else, and I was able to conquer it. The fear can be the enemy of faith. And the key is what we do when we're confronted by it. What do we focus on? Do we focus on our fear, or do we focus on God? An early example of fear was Peter was able to walk on water, walk in faith. Only 2 people in the world have walked on water. Jesus is one of them, and Peter's the other one. Pretty team company for him to be able to brag, It's only me and Jesus walked on water. Nobody else has. But when we're confronted by fear, we can focus on our fear and magnify it, or we can choose to focus on God. If God is with us, He'll never leave us nor forsake us. We're told that in Scripture. So when we're confronted by fear, we don't have to confront it alone. He's there confronted with us. Sometimes He'll remove that fear from our lives completely, but most times He'll walk us through it and help us conquer it so we're not a slave to it. Might mean we've still got a little bit of that in our life. Like my fear of heights, I'm still not 100% comfortable. It's still there. But it's not my master anymore. I've conquered it. But the key is, don't deny your fear, but ask God to help you conquer it and not be a slave to it. In Timothy it tells us that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a love, power and a sound mind. Now I was thinking about that scripture, and says that fear is not from God, but He's given us love, power, and a sound mind. Love, He loves us, and He wants us to achieve our best. He wants us to fill our potential. So He's going to love us, He's going to help us. He's given us the power. Now, there's nothing more powerful than the power of God. And that power is more powerful than fear. And He's given us a sound mind. So a lot of our fears, most of our fears are up here. You know? There's no logic for me to be fearful of heights. You know, when I'm standing on even a solid concrete floor, doesn't matter how high it is, there's no logic for me to be fearful. But it is, because it's up here. But God has given us not a spirit of fear. Fear doesn't come from God. Fear comes from the enemy, because the enemy wants us to focus on anything but to God. He's given us our love and our mind. So, if you're struggling with fear, pray about it. Ask God to help you, to bring people in your life. I'm happy to pray if any of you want prayer. I'll stand with you, or one of the leadership team can stand and pray with you. But fear stops us from fulfilling our potential in everything. And fear can enslave us if we allow it.